Well, I'm so excited about our webinar today. There's amazing things that we have to share with our audience. Russ or Lisa, what are you excited to share?
I'm always excited to share the quotes I've stumbled upon that relate to our topic, but having been trained as a pharmacist, although most of my work is not related to medical needs or studies, I love it when we can talk about the neurobiology of all of this chemistry in our bodies and how really being social and having meaningful connection, it all just works together beautifully. So I'm excited about lots of our parts, but I'm really excited about that. And we can geek out on some dopamine and serotonin and all those fun things. Okay, Russ.
That's funny. And this may be one of the reasons why we all three work together, because I'm actually excited about the same thing. I think, most people know that there's, some innate drive to be social. And we've been told that human beings are social beings and things like that. But we probably don't go into the discussion with them about where that comes from and the fact that it's partly anatomy, it's partly biochemistry. And so the impact there is really interesting because a lot of this is under our control, but a lot of it is innate. And the good news about that, that'll be fun to talk about, is we can have a positive impact on that, which we're going to touch on rather during this webinar.
What about
And
you, Donna?
I'm very excited to share kind of an approach that is unique and extremely human. So, in a world of business consulting, which I've been immersed in for many decades, there's always like processes and systems, and all those are true and they work. And at the same time, being able to bring your humanity into the work world, especially in the context of transforming culture. I'll be sharing some stories later on in our webinar about situations, context, things that I've experienced, and how the work that we're doing right now in terms of bringing belonging into the workplace is not only critical in terms of transforming an organization, but also connecting to that deepest part of each of us when it comes to a human perspective. So, very excited. So, why don't we get started? Our topic today, my name is Donna Brighton, and our topic today is from civility to belonging. We're talking all about how to advance your workplace connection strategy. And before we get into the heart of the conversation, I wanted to take a moment and share from each of us. The three of us have collaborated and created the Friendship Institute. And we all have a unique perspective, a unique reason, a unique story around why this work matters so much to us. So, Dr. Russ, would you start us off and why this work is so important?
Thank you, Donna. It's interesting. So as a conventionally trained physician, then with additional training in integrative medicine and whole health, one of the things that happens early on in conventional medicine is you focus on science and you really don't focus on the healing relationship between the role that you're about to engage in and the person or persons sitting across from you. And so you're left to understand that, well, if I just share this information in a linear format and I'm going to help people be better and things of that nature. But the magic of healthcare really takes place in the healing relationship that can be developed. And the same is true outside of medicine as well. And so one of the things that's been really intriguing for me is that what I've learned sitting across from people in healthcare has been invaluable for me with regards to what I've learned in creating relationships and maintaining them outside of my work and in my private life.
I'll jump in, Donna, and I'm Lisa, and I have always loved trying to help the teams that I am a part of thrive. And one thing that has just been so good is I'm still friends. I had a call this morning from a colleague, a gentleman who was the head of business development for a company that I ran. And I hadn't talked to him in probably a decade. And he just called to basically, he made my day. He called and gave me just kind of a little compliment. And he's been retired for a year or two now, and he just wanted to reach out. But I love pulling teams together. And then when we can blend the science that supports why meaningful connection at work matters, I have heard people and they've said it to me, oh, well, the culture stuff, that's fluffy. And I'm like, it is far from fluffy. And I love that data is proving right now that it is far from fluffy, whether it's productivity, whether it's employee retention, whether it is creativity, it's all the things that we need now. And I would like to, Donna, if I may, just to share a quote that I came across that I think sets the stage. And it is from Jane Goodall. She said, "You cannot get through a single day without having an impact on the world around you. What you
Mm.
do makes a difference, and you have to decide what kind of difference you want to make." And we want to make positive differences.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that quote, Lisa. That's really powerful. I would agree that we all want to make an impact. And in my work doing culture and organizational transformation, I've been challenged, like I said, because there can be a lot of complexity in that process. And when I came across the work of Judith Glaser, who talks about conversational intelligence, she made this point that conversation leads to connection and connection creates culture. And so those are the points that we're really bringing together today. And we're going to be discussing advancing your workplace connection strategy. This matters because this is that connection point, that pivot point for all organizations around their culture. And as AI begins reshaping the workforce, I'm hearing reports here, there, and everywhere around fewer people being hired, people being let go. There's this idea of the rise of the agentic workforce, all of these changes that are happening. And at the fundamental core of who we are, we're still humans. We need to belong, and connection in the workplace is core, critical, and essential for success. And without connection, there's, as you mentioned, Lisa, a reduction in performance. You lose people, the people that you want to hold on to. So we're going to address all of that. And this quote really summarizes it. It was so impactful the first time I read it, about the challenge of loneliness at work, right? That it is as dangerous to your health as being obese or smoking. Wow, that's significant. And in our previous webinar, we did address this. We talked about why belonging is absolutely essential. It's a business imperative. And when belonging exists in a workplace, the improvements around performance, the improvement in retention, and fewer sick days. This transformation in increasing belonging in the workplace is the way to differentiate. It's a business strategy to help your organization really, really stand out among so many organizations. So that was our conversation during our last webinar. And we also raised the point that there's so much conversation about well-being. We talk about mental well-being and physical well-being, but relational well-being is often overlooked. So we introduced that concept and we brought forward the idea of the Civility Index. This is helping all of us recognize that we start off in a place where we are civil and polite to each other, and then that through time, we can build greater levels of connection toward friendship and ultimately soul friendship. And not everybody falls within each of these categories. Some people, they're just warm and civil, like the person that is at the grocery store that you have a nice little chat with every time you go in and pick up some groceries. And then we have trusted friendships and casual friendships. And so they're all different kinds of friendships. And that's better described in the Civility Index. So we want you to have access to that information. If you were unable to join us for that previous webinar, there's a QR code. We'll be sharing this with you throughout the webinar today, and you'll get access to the recording so you can catch up on that information and get your copy of the Civility Index. But let's get right into our conversation today. I know we're very excited to talk about the neurobiology of human connection. So, Dr. Russ, let's get started today talking about the science behind connection, why this is so important, why this matters to us as we're building cultures of connection and belonging.
Thank you. And I actually think this is really cool because I think most of us know that human beings are social animals, if you will. And we all have this understanding that it's good to be social because in our, let's say, agrarian days, our more primitive days, we had greater protection in numbers. We had more people to help care for one another. We had more people helping to look out for food and things like that. But where did that actually come from? And a large part of that actually comes from our neurochemistry and actually our neuroanatomy, the way our brains are actually made up. So here you see some of the brain's connection centers. And some of these areas you may have heard of: the prefrontal cortex, the insula, the anterior cingulate cortex, the limbic system. Some of these might be more familiar than others, but each of them plays a critically important role, not just because it's part of our brain, but because it actually has an impact on our desire and our ability to be social. And again, when you think about it, from the way that human beings evolved, why might that be important? For all the reasons we just went over, but also because it engenders trust. It engenders the opportunity to say, okay, I might connect with this person, and there's a little bit of risk involved, but literally, if I've got enough of this biochemistry floating around in those active areas, I'm going to be willing to take that risk because the positive response to that could be very worthwhile. That trust was important to our evolution and to our being successful in the world, but it still is today. So whether that trust is at work, in the family, with oneself, it is the centerpiece of success in so much of what goes on in our world. And a large part of it comes from here, the anatomy. Now, we talked a little bit about biochemistry, and if I'm bringing back bad memories for any of you listening, I apologize. But it's important to know that, again, so much of this is driven by the way that we are. And so you take a look, you hear about oxytocin. This is also sometimes called the love hormone. It is something that helps us to come together. Again, gives us the oomph to take that risk to connect with somebody and the chance that it might actually be beneficial for us. Vasopressin, dopamine, all these things help support that desire and that feedback for having a positive connection. In fact, it's even here, if we are all smiling at one another on the screen, there are data suggesting that that actually can bump oxytocin levels for somebody watching. The same is true for any one of us who's just smiling ourselves, just offering a smile. So those little, micro interactions, as Donna was speaking about, whether it's at the coffee shop or the person you're running across in the hallway and just offering a big greeting, or the person like Lisa spoke about that we haven't heard from in so long, we get a sense of just like, gosh, that felt nice. Part of that has to do with these different neurotransmitters. Now, you'll also see about endogenous opioids. Now, the interesting thing here is I think most people know that opioids have a significant role to play with regards to pain management. And so when we're in pain, we might receive opioids. The body also releases endogenous opioids, opioids that are already in the body. But they're also engaged in reward and pleasure and good feelings. And so imagine, if you will, here's this space, the endogenous opioid system, that sits in this area of pain and pain reduction, but also social connection and more, because it has an impact on immunity and stress response and things of that nature. And what an interesting aspect of our makeup to think that our social activity can be tied into the opioid system, which has so much to do with pain reduction and socialization. Donna, I think you had something I think that you might want to share around this space.
I do. So it was really interesting. I had the privilege of speaking at the Neuro Leadership Institute Summit a few years back. And one of the researchers was sharing a paper talking about the reality that the same center in your brain lights up when you're in relational pain as when you are in physical pain. I thought that was so interesting. So these chemicals at work in the brain are creating these pain centers. So when we hear like, oh, I'm dying of a heartbreak, that's a legit thing. Like people are genuinely feeling that degree of pain in the brain because of the relational challenges they have. So these chemicals are super fascinating. And one tip I wanted to share on these chemicals, I heard the most interesting thing the other day where somebody recommended that instead of starting your day with cortisol, meaning the stress hormone, by opening your phone, looking at your email, or reading the news, right? It's all stressful, that you should actually start your day with an oxytocin inducing experience, whether that being pausing and taking some deep breaths for yourself, giving your significant other or child a hug in the morning, petting your animals, whatever that might be for you. Start your day with some oxytocin instead of cortisol.
I like
That is great. And Donna, when you shared that a day or two ago, I've shared it with several people, and I do think it's important. And Russ, I wanted to just add one comment on smiling. You know, we do know when we smile at people, a lot of times they'll smile back. But one of the things that I found is you can also hear smiles. And in my earlier days when I was starting to train like new members of sales teams and or customer service division, all of those, one of the things that we did was I had a mirror at least the size of like our laptop screen put at everyone's place where they worked so that they could learn to smile while they were on the phone having interactions with people, because the warmth does carry through.
Oh, that is really cool. I like that a lot. Actually, Don, I'm going to ask you to go back once more because there's a couple of other active compounds I think it's important to speak about. As we were talking about, this is, the positive hormones have like a feedback loop. If we're smiling and somebody smiles back at us, again, that might bump our oxytocin levels. And at the same time, there are hormones that are released. There are neuroactive compounds released when we are under stress or when we are isolated and feeling lonely. And these can be things like cortisol, tachykinins, things of that nature. And why is that important? So in the short term, these are actually balancing compounds. They can actually help us. But in the long term, if we are feeling loneliness for a long period of time, or feeling somewhat ostracized, even if we convinced ourselves of that, if it's not real, there are biochemical and actually neuroanatomic consequences for all of that. Now, the compounds that you see at the top of the page, they actually reduce the compounds that you see at the bottom and vice versa. So there's this feedback loop. So any way that we can do like what Donna and Lisa were talking about, little activities that will boost the, let's say, feel good neuropeptides and hormones, that's going to be beneficial because it reduces a lot of the untoward effects from some of those isolation response compounds. Please, next. So interesting enough, social interaction is based not just in the way that we feel, but the way we feel is based a lot in neurochemistry, neurobiology, and even neuroanatomy. So the intriguing thing here is that acute and chronic isolation, loneliness, can have an impact on both the degree of release of these different compounds that we just talked about and their impact in those different neuroanatomic sites that we spoke about that have so much to do with not only our willingness to be social, but our energy about being social and what it can bring to the fore. So what happens when connection breaks down? We talked a little bit about how there's changes, and some of those changes happen because there's inflammation throughout the body, not just in your joints or in your GI tract or, impairment in your immune system, but even in what happens within your brain. And that can have an impact with regards to the way that the connections between nerves, called the synapses, the way that they act with one another. It can actually have an impact in the overall size and ability to function of specific areas of your brain over long periods of time, and even has been tied to the development of not just mood disorders like anxiety and depression, but even other types of disorders on the more organic level. So it's very intriguing to understand that loneliness, isolation, not only has an impact on our brain function, but it has an impact on systemic function with regards to our immune system and things of that nature. And so it's, we don't want anyone to feel isolated, to feel alone. And it's one of the things that's wonderful about this work that we all do together, because in reaching out to connect with a human being, not only do we benefit, but so does the other person. And there's that positive feedback loop. Again, some of it biochemical and some of it you feel almost immediately. So all this stuff about, hey, it's challenging if somebody's feeling lonely or if we're feeling isolated. Oh my gosh. Well, the good news here is all it takes is a little connection, and you can reverse the changes that were initiated by feeling lonely and isolated. Whether you yourself are feeling this way, or you sense that somebody in your office or in your sphere of influence is feeling that way, to reach out can benefit not only you, but the person involved too. Now imagine if you could expand that to more of the people that you work with and more, because there's this concept of synchronicity. If more and more people are involved in activities, and you see some examples here, whether it's laughter, singing, emotional storytelling, this idea of narrative and connection and all, it's so important and so powerful. So the key here, and again, we go back to this, I just talk about my healthcare work, and then by extension, the work I've done with consulting with different corporate entities around this space, because there's so many wellness programs out there, and there's so much of an emphasis on physical health and emotional health, and all that is fabulous. And yet the one area that has been neglected, much to our dismay and much to our harm, is the pro-social activities that need to be a part of any space where we work, and certainly outside of work too, because it has an impact on our physical health, our emotional health, and it certainly has an impact on our ability to produce good work.
Brilliant.
Said, except Ross, if I were to be involved with a group singing with you two right now, I don't think that that would engender a lot of connection. It would probably have some disconnection
Well,
immediately.
in
Although, Lisa,
in the worst case, Lisa, we'd be laughing, and that's still shared.
that's true. And I was just sharing a story with a friend last night about a conference I attended. And speaking of singing, it was a woman who was an opera singer who had lost her voice, then found it and taught people how to sing and how to speak and how to really bring out their voice. It was amazing. That session concluded with everybody in that entire conference singing together. And
Wow.
I don't consider myself to have a very good voice, but it was incredibly powerful for all of us to join in and sing together.
Well, we'll let you sing at the end, Donna, and we'll see how
Thank
you've
you.
improved. How about that?
I think we'll pass on that. We'll spare all the participants. So now that everybody has a better sense of the neurobiology of human connection, it makes it a better case for understanding why it matters to us as humans. But we want to transition to why this matters in the workplace. And we've put together a resource for everyone called the Belonging Blueprint. It has these 5 domains or areas that will help you walk through and understand how to implement an organizational approach to belonging. And we're going to give you some insight into each of these, but we don't have time to go into depth in each category during our time together today. So we'd love for you, as you're listening in, to get access to that Belonging Blueprint. And if you check out this QR code here, not only in the first email will you receive the link to the previous webinar and to the Civility Index, you'll also get a copy of the Belonging Blueprint, which will enable you to then kind of read through all the different sections and see how this might be implementable. And you'll see here, there's in the chat, a link for you as well. So that's the Belonging Blueprint, which really gives the full picture of what it looks like to create belonging in the workplace. But let's start off with the first 3 pillars. And what Russ was talking about in that neurobiology of connection is when people have that experience, it also translates into this feeling of being unseen, unsafe, and unsupported. And our goal in implementing this Belonging Blueprint in the workplace is instead to shift that so people do feel a sense that they belong. And you do that through these 3 pillars. And the pillars are that individuals in the workplace feel seen, they feel safe, and they feel supported. And there's a lot of research behind each of these categories. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Amy Edmondson's work. It also connects to this work from Google. So this goes back a ways, and you can access it here from the Google Rework site. They conducted this project called Project Aristotle, and their goal was to understand what makes a truly effective team. And I remember when the research first came out, it was quite shocking to many people that it's not about the smartest people. It's not about how many hours they work together. The number one reason for teams that worked successfully together was psychological safety. And that gets to one of those pillars of a belonging workplace, which is I can show up and I'm not going to be punished for saying something that you're not pleased with, and you're not going to be mad at me for making a mistake, but instead we'll use it as a learning opportunity. So we really see from this research that Google did, as well as Amy Edmondson, that safety is an absolute foundation of belonging. Another resource comes from Jeffrey Cohen, and you can see he has 4 components that he outlines. And psychological safety is one of those 4 core things when it comes to creating belonging. So in addition to safety is social connection, identity and inclusion. So you're seen, and purpose and contribution that's supported. Another really interesting component of this being seen, safe, and supported, that as the workforce evolves, as AI starts transforming the workplace, that we're going to be relying on trust and belonging as core and key human elements in the workplace. So just thinking about the future of work, belonging is absolutely essential. And that comes from these 3 pillars of being seen, safe, and supported. In addition to those 3 pillars, there's 4 organizational levers. And those 4 levers are, you can see here, culture signals, relational leadership, shared experiences, and purpose and contribution. And I want to say something about these levers, that these are 3 things in the organization that every leader has access to. And by paying attention to those levers, you can make tremendous shifts in your culture organizationally. So let's explore each of those in a little bit more depth. So culture signals. Lisa, I don't know if there was anything that you wanted to share when it comes to culture signals and your experience in leading in the organization.
Yes, I do have some things I want to share here. I think, Donna, if we look at the different things, just even at a high level listed on the slide, it's the language that is used and the tone with which we use the words that we use. What is it that we are celebrating? And what words as leaders within the company are we using, and what are we choosing to recognize? I think that leads into the patterns that people see. Do they feel welcome? Do they feel that their ideas are going to be valued? And I think it goes along with the visual cues. And I lumped those first 3 together because of a couple of experiences that I go back to over the years as I have led management teams. And in preparation for this, I reached out to a couple of leaders that joined me with 4 different corporate journeys. And I just posed a simple question and said, what made you stay with me? Because some of the companies we had great successes and some of them not so much. And one of them said, and I want to just read you the message they sent back, said, it was the ability to have honest discussion and debates with you. We felt safe to disagree, and then we knew you would evaluate, make a decision, and we would all move forward together. And I think that goes back to feeling seen and safe and feeling supported because they felt comfortable enough because of the way that we handled meetings, the way that we interacted. And So with meeting rhythms and rituals, I had executive team leadership meetings weekly, but we had broader meetings monthly, and we had an all hands on deck meeting quarterly, and anybody could ask anything. And that was one of the other responses that I got back, was that regardless of what we were dealing with, every employee felt valued. So they didn't have to wait. There wasn't this hierarchy. Of course, at the end of the day, a decision was going to have to be made. And as a CEO, the the buck stopped on my desk. But I think everyone felt heard. And while we were trying to set up what I would call all the right or best culture signals that we knew how, we had boxes back in the day, because we were all in an office, that people could put anonymous suggestions in if they did not know us well enough to know that it was a safe place. Hey, what can we do better? How can we improve? And that leads us to the last point on the slide of storytelling. I mean, what was it that I talked about when we had the all hands on deck meetings? Of course, we talked about our big wins. Of course, we talked about whatever plans for expansion, but we also talked about people at every layer of the organization and what difference they have made or could make, because I wanted everyone to feel seen. And I think it goes to show, which is why a lot of us are still in a relationship with each other years after we work together, because these things take intentionality from the leader. But I didn't go out and spend a boatload of money to have like multicolor posters created with this, that, and the other in 3D. But I think bottom line, Donna, and I'm sure you might have a comment on this, as a leader, it's imperative that we model what it is that we want to be seen. And when people in the company could see that even my right-hand direct reports would be like, no, I don't really think you're thinking about that necessarily in the way I'm thinking about it, then they would realize that they were safe and could also voice their opinions. And that comes back to being authentic and treating everyone that we're working with respect.
So powerful, Lisa. Thank you for sharing those examples. And I'll just give a quick story. I was working with a client. It was a global organization, and they had recently gone through it was an M&A, so there was a new leadership team that had been acquired, and so they were working together. It was a kind of a leadership meeting with the senior most leaders and then their next level leaders. And they were sharing what their new culture was going to be and the importance of the values. But back to these culture signals. And Dr. S, I think in a conversation, you said, what's the difference between culture and climate? The climate is the stuff that we're observing, but it sets the tone for the underlying culture. That's why these are the signals, right? What are people paying attention to that shows how should I show up and behave? And at this particular meeting, the leaders had a beautiful message that they were sharing. So those were all the words, but the behaviors, the visual things, what happened at the break time was that in this global context, a group of those senior most leaders, although they had made the reference to the fact that this was going to be one organization, one team, we're all working together, they moved aside and they started speaking in a language that the other team members did not speak or understand. And it sounds really like, what's the big deal there, right? Because they were just going and having a conversation in a language they felt comfortable with. But what it indicated, it was that cue, that signal that they were set apart and they were having a conversation that other people were not welcome or invited into. So all of those are cues and signals that leaders send, and often unknowingly. And I remember at that meeting, I had somebody walk up to me and said, they just killed the culture, didn't they? I said, yep. Because all the words, those beautiful things they said, were overwritten by the behaviors that they demonstrated during that meeting.
That's awesome, Don. That's awesome. I would just reflect that, that sense of climate, like what you notice as soon as you walk into a room. doesn't always align with what people state that their culture actually is. And just very quickly, I want to take, experience in healthcare and talk about experience outside of healthcare. Most healthcare systems have moved to a different kind of organizational strategy where the buck doesn't just stop with the physician. It stops with what is being done right and wrong. So that if the nurse or the assistant or whomever notices something that the physician is doing that might be harmful to the patient, it's incumbent upon them to bring it up. And it is also the organization that stands up and says, you are safe in doing so because what we stand for is what is best for the individuals being cared for. Now, that same type of organizational strategy is being brought out into all different kinds of organizations. So just what you were both speaking about, that sense of safety and in alignment for, regardless of whether we're talking about the purpose for the individual or the purpose for the entire corporate entity, it's about doing the right thing and being able to call out things appropriately and safely in service to that overriding culture.
That's outstanding. And that connects very beautifully to these culture signal audit or improvement questions that you can go through and ask. So, visually, you mentioned, what am I seeing? Verbally, what are people saying? And then, what's that emotional undercurrent? What are you experiencing or feeling that's not necessarily what you're hearing or seeing, but there's that undercurrent. So, all of these areas are ways that you can pay attention to culture signals, which is the first of 4 different levers you can use in creating organizational belonging. So, the next lever that we want to talk about is relational leadership. And I thought this was really fascinating. Gallup talks often about the fact that people don't leave organizations, they leave managers. So, that makes the case for why relational leadership is so important. And Lisa, I don't know if you have any thoughts here on relational leadership.
I do. And just one thought on that. I was just in the past couple of weeks coaching someone in their supposedly dream job, and they wanted coaching on how they just had to get out of there even to take a lower level job because of their boss. And it has been ongoing, but it has just reached new levels. And so it is so true that the way we treat our employees is the biggest lever. I Relational leadership, wow. I think part of it goes back to being authentic as a leader. And the only way, in my opinion, that we're going to have any meaningful relational leadership opportunities is if we are authentically ourselves. Because too often, I used to hear it, people wanted the CEO to show up and be big and charismatic and all of these things. And I probably do have the loud voice that goes along with it, but I'm not charismatic. But I took the time to meaningfully connect, whether it was knowing that Russ likes cats or having an opportunity to meet people that are important to him or knowing people's birthday. It's an opportunity to make a connection that is personal, because it goes a very long way. Because at the end of the day, we are better together, but we have to be better together in a way that respects who we are. And mine was more birthday wishes, or mine was figuring out what it is that kind of floats your boat and reaching out to you in that regard, because I believe what we do with our teams is what gets amplified throughout the organization. Because just as you were saying, what we do is going to be a lot more caught than it is taught. We've all heard that saying, so people are going to model what they see us doing.
Absolutely. So that's lever number 2, relational leadership. And let's talk about lever number 3, which is shared experiences. Now, the slide itself is an eye chart, and we're not going to cover every single thing on this list. But the point being, shared experiences are absolutely essential to creating a culture of belonging, to making people feel seen, safe, and supported. And whether you are in an office environment that is in person or you're working virtual, there's a whole variety of different ways that you can create shared experiences. And something I found fascinating, then I'd love to hear from you, Russ and Lisa, anything you'd like to add. I was reviewing some stories about organizations who are like, we're 100% remote. And while they may be working remote, they have annual or biannual gatherings where they bring everyone together. So they create shared experiences. So even though they might work, sitting from their home office desk chair, they still value and prioritize shared in-person experiences. And I thought that was a really important point to bring up, that as much as possible, creating the human connection as well as the virtual connection.
And Donna, that is so important. I tried to do that, and I've worked with clients who are doing that more in a virtual world now. But what I have seen to be the most effective isn't this mandatory, you are going to fill in the blank, you're going to go do this ropes class, or you're going to go and we're going to have a day-long retreat and hike this mountain or whatever. But it's creating a few different virtual experiences and letting people choose. So yes, we do want you. We think it's important for there to be connection. But when it's this, well, mandatory, you're going to go to this cooking class and you're going to enjoy cooking, that might not be the right thing for you. But if we can let people choose some different team building activities, some different getting to know people activities in an area of their interest, it's going to deepen the bonds a lot more quickly. And then if you start feeding off of that, I can say, hey, Russ likes cat. Here's this cat group over here. Would you like to invite Russ? Because I'd love to connect you. So you can build off of those in a more meaningful way than this mandatory, because people say, well, that's hokey. Well, I don't like that. Well, nobody else wanted to be there. Okay, well, fine. Let's figure out some different avenues to get people together in a meaningful way.
Yeah, I was going to offer that I had just this remarkable experience working with I was consulting with a multinational corporation that I really only had contact with, let's say, 5 or 10 people. And they invited me into their annual year-end gathering. And I was like, I don't really know too many people. This is very nice of you. I'm not sure I should participate. And they asked that everybody, including me, share just a little something about ourselves that maybe folks would know, and a couple of pictures that depict some things important in our lives. And indeed, I went, I attended the meeting, the virtual meeting, and all these people showed just little brief pictures of themselves and a little something about themselves. Each person had one slide. And it was literally hundreds of people that showed with this really gentle music playing in the background. And there were lots of people on this virtual meeting, and it was amazing. And just what you were speaking about, Lisa, is just all of a sudden there's connections like, yeah, I didn't know that person liked poetry, or wow, I didn't know that, look at that, they have 3 kids and I never knew, or whatever the case may be. And it subtly and yet not so subtly changed things. I found it in myself. And then, my slide pops up and I would get a comment from somebody about something. It was like, just a really small thing. And it was so meaningful. And here it was virtual. And so it's the creative amongst all of us, those who are watching, those we work with, can create something like this that can actually develop connection in a way that's meaningful and purposeful and gives people that sense of safety that we've been speaking about.
And Russ talking about that even reminded me, I had the honor of working with you in person, but I had only ever met Donna virtually when we founded the basis of what, with your help, has turned into the Friendship Institute. And so, we are living proof that, and you and Donna only met after you joined forces with us. You only met in person after we were established. And So a lot can be done virtually.
Yes.
Excellent point, Lisa. So we've talked about the 4 organizational levers to create this belonging culture. One of them being culture signals, another being relational leadership, and then we are just talking about shared experiences. Now I want to walk you through purpose and contribution. And this ties in not only from a personal perspective, but also organizational. So I'm going to start with the organizational perspective around purpose and contribution. Now, I use a variety of different measurement tools when it comes to culture because culture can be measured. And this is what's called a circumplex that shows you the cultural measurement, if you will, of a client I was working with. Now, you can see when you look at this circumplex, there's not a lot of color. And the CEO now jokingly looks back and he remembers what I shared with him about this, which is that is the donut of doom, which means that without all the full color in the organization, it was not a clear and aligned culture. So we did some work. And the reason I'm raising this is because if you look in the upper right hand quadrant, that was mission. And there was a severe lack of understanding and awareness around purpose, around vision, around goals. And believe it or not, there's lots of opportunity as you look around this circumplex. We could have started in all different places. But where we consistently will begin when we see a result like this is reinforcing purpose and contribution. How does what you do every day translate or connect to what matters most in the organization? And so as we work together with a culture transformation team, this became the result the next time that we took that measurement. So you can see some pretty significant improvement, especially in that area of mission. So as we focused there, that created greater levels of transformation. The year after that, these were the results that they got. And finally, as we work together, you can see over time how they made consistent improvement in their culture. But it all started off by focusing on mission. What is the purpose and contribution that I make to this organization and how my work supports the direction that we're going? So that's from an organizational perspective. I don't know if you want to add anything from a personal perspective or organizational perspective.
One of the areas that there is a great deal of emphasis on now with regards to health and well-being is working with a person's own sense of their mission and purpose. And that can be extended into the place where they work. But the intriguing thing is not everybody has an understood sense of their purpose and their meaning. And so the invitation is, this is something that could be very important for you to explore, because when somebody has an established sense of meaning and purpose, they're actually significantly healthier than someone who does not have one.
Well, Russ, it ties right into friend yourself first, because if we aren't pro-social toward ourselves, then we're probably not going to be pro-social to others. And I think, you're saying that reminded me, because I was sitting here just thinking of it then when you said it, Donna. It goes back to modeling what the actions, the culture, the words to bring about this connected culture. But we have to be healthy and have healthy boundaries ourselves. I remember one time saying to an executive, I was newly brought in to lead this organization, and one of the first executive's words to me with our one-on-one was, I haven't taken my vacation in the last 5 years. And I just said, well, that's going to change. And she said, no, it's not. I've got too much to do. And I said, well, let's back up, because if we don't take care of you, it isn't going to matter. So that, yes, her purpose was great. Her contribution was great. But in order for us all to fulfill the mission together, we needed her healthy.
So important. So hopefully everybody's got some great examples around those 4 organizational levers for creating organizational belonging. Back to culture signals, relational leadership, shared experience, and then last but not least, purpose and contribution. So this all sounds fantastic, but how do you make this happen, right? What in your organization, what do you need to do in order to increase the level of belonging in the organization. So there's a variety of tips here when it comes to implementation. And of course, there's a lot more that will be in the belonging blueprint that you can leverage as you work on implementation. Everything from a 90-day and 12-month roadmap to simple things like considering how you can increase belonging in the regular, whether it be meetings or rituals or reviews or your onboarding process. Any of those things can have a greater level of belonging included in them when you're intentional. So again, remember, if you scan this QR code, you will get access not only to the previous webinar recording and the Civility Index, but also the recording link for this webinar, as well as the belonging blueprint. So you have access to those implementation tools. So one of the things that really is key when you consider implementation is this idea of metrics. And you've probably all heard that what you measure is what matters, right? What matters is what you measure, and that what you measure is what people will pay attention to in the workplace. So there's a variety of leading and lagging indicators you can see here. We're not suggesting that you need to do every single one of them, but these are examples of things that you can do beyond traditional engagement. And here's my pitch. I know that many organizations do engagement surveys, and that's great as long as you take action on the results that you're receiving. Do something about what you hear. However, engagement is actually a lagging indicator. And one of the things that I'm quite puzzled about is that in the 30 or so years that people have been measuring, tracking, trying to do something about employee engagement, the scores have not shifted that much. So if we're doing this much, we're spending so much money on engagement, maybe that's not the right measure. And I'm not suggesting any one of these are or are not the correct measure, but what if you reconsider the metrics that you're using to measure the belonging, the engagement, the connection within your organization? So if you're interested, we'd love to have a conversation about how you can implement any of these measurements, because it is essential that people feel seen, safe, and supported in your organization. And if that is not captured somehow somewhere in your engagement survey, then there's some data missing for you. So I want to talk about how do you implement not only from measurement, but also creating that organization, that environment, that way that people feel, I belong here. We would like to propose the idea of blending the role of connection coach with a belonging architect. So the idea behind a belonging architect is simply, in the past, you might have called it a culture champion, somebody who is actually paying attention and intentionally taking action in these areas that we've talked about, whether it is those 3 pillars or the 4 organizational levers, helping, coaching, working with leaders internally to ensure that these belonging behaviors are being practiced. In addition to that, we talked about connection coaches in our last webinar. And what that looks like is creating an environment whereby the connection coaches work internally with groups of people to transform your culture through conversation. So we've created this certified coaching connection or certified connection coaching program. And you can see here an overview that we begin with some foundational training so everybody gets comfortable with what needs to happen. But what's unique is that as part of the certification process, people go through and actually do the coaching and connecting of a group of people. So there'll be an opportunity to select the people that they're going to work with, and then in that group, create a sense of belonging. And that will snowball and create incredible transformational impacts across the organization as they're actually modeling and practicing this opportunity to connect with other people who may be from different areas of the organization, different roles, different levels, creating a space and a place and a way for people to have conversation. And then as part of that certification process, there'll be an opportunity for feedback and reflection, and not only within the coaching group that's getting certified, but also from those who got to participate in those conversation circles. And then finally, of course, we love to celebrate, because what you celebrate and reward is what comes back to you. So that's just a little overview. I don't know, Lisa and Russ, if you want to add anything to the conversation about certified connection coach.
I think that it's so important for us to have these champions so that we can start with a little nucleus that can go out in the companies. And if we wind up training even 2 or 3 within a company, then to look back in a year or 2 and measure the difference, I am quite confident it's going to be significant. We've all lived through personal experiences, which is the foundation for us putting this together. And I'm excited to see some measurable improvements with our clients.
Agreed. And I would say, there's a whole range, we spoke of this before, of wellness programs out there. And there are even chief wellness officers embedded now in many institutions. And yet there is a lot of pushback about whether these wellness programs actually create a return on investment or even a value on investment. And one of the things that the three of us is committed to is this idea that what's been missing in the wellness programs for most entities is the focus on relationship. It's on the focus on creating the connection between the employees, starting with oneself and then with the people that you work with. That's why so many of the wellness programs are not working, because they have neglected what may be most important, and that is connection. And so imagine if in your own organizations, you had somebody whose primary responsibility was creating that connection amongst the people who work there and following what happens as a result of that. Well, we can tell you we're very, very interested in seeing what happens.
Well, and imagine the change from just a little shift of, I really want to connect with you as an internal colleague versus we've all been in those environments where it's internal competition. I want to connect with you, not compete with you. Let's save competition for competition, but let's connect and work together because we're all on the same team.
Absolutely. And it's interesting, Lisa. I've done leadership offsites where we had opportunities for connection, and people walk away and say, wow, I've never gotten to know people in this way. I remember one I did last year, and somebody was so taken by the fact they had never actually interacted with their colleagues in this way ever. And it made such a difference for them to get to know the other people. So I wanted to tie into the benefits of bringing a certification coach or coaches into the organization, is that it reduces the reliance on like having some big consulting intervention. The goal is to upskill the individuals within an organization and have them be able to begin that transformative conversation that leads to culture change. So within the individuals who are participating, you can see a whole bunch of individual benefits for the person who's certified as a connection coach, as well as for the people who get to participate. And imagine, as you said, Lisa, it's an exponential impact. It's not just one person who's changed. It's they get to be participating in this group and then continue working with others. So there's change and transformation and incredible benefit at an individual level, but also at the organizational level. And we've talked numerous times about the importance of belonging as it connects to productivity, to engagement, to retention, to ensuring that the people that you have hired and invested in and onboarded are actually operating at the highest and best level that they can, which is essentially what engagement's all about. So having connection coaches in an organization can lead to incredible transformation. So we would love for you to download the Belonging Blueprint to learn more about how you can get this implemented in your organization. You'll get access to all these materials if you go here to this QR code. And we just like to say thank you for participating in our webinar today. And we look forward to increasing the level of connection, which leads to cultures of belonging in the workplace.